What's contributing in particular to the wage growth that we started to see this quarter?
Yeah, so that was clearly the big story today, right? The fastest pace of wage growth we've seen of the entire expansion so far. Average hourly earnings ticked up to 2.9% from 2.7%. It's really interesting to see which sectors are driving that. So this chart that I brought you guys here shows, the blue line is that sort of overall wage growth number that we saw. The white line shows one of the really big contributors to that, which was the healthcare industry. And so I find this really interesting because if you recall a week ago when we got the GDP report, we were looking at the business investment data, and one of the really big drivers of business investment was a pickup in investment in medical equipment. So this kind of seems to bolster that, story that healthcare is becoming a more and more important sector of this economy, and that's where we're really seeing a lot of the gains right now. One of the interesting things about this chart as well is that you see 3% wage growth, going back to pre-recession levels is kind of, it seems like it's maturing. There's probably a question about how much higher that can go, but that's certainly what is, one of the things in the driver's seat at the moment.
Yeah, particularly technology as well in this sector in particular.
No, that's a really good point, and especially since it had underperformed the wage growth overall for the last couple of years. It's now more than catching up. I wanted to look at manufacturing because, of course, that's very politically sensitive. It's something the president touts a lot. Talk a little bit about the rebound in job growth in that sector.
Yeah, so clearly manufacturing is kind of driving the boat lately. The last several months, the last year or so, we've seen an acceleration in employment growth, and that's really all been on the goods producing side, and especially in manufacturing. And so if you sort of break down the numbers based on which industries are hiring more, you can kind of really see that. So the purple and the blue lines here show those increases in goods producing employment growth for sort of split up into high paying goods producing jobs and low paying goods producing jobs. Those are the blue and the purple lines respectively. What's interesting is on the services side of the economy, we're really seeing a more serious slowdown, especially in those high paying service jobs. And this is something that could potentially be important.
And that's the yellow line, right?
Yeah, that's the yellow line. So you can see that job growth for these high-paying service jobs actually, slowed to basically the slowest rate of the expansion. And that's kind of important because we're moving more toward a services economy where some of these innovation sectors are really what kind of drive the overall productivity growth in this country. And so we're going to want to see that turn around pretty soon if we can sort of continue to
keep this expansion going.
Exactly, positive outlook for growth.
So something that was discussed quite a lot on Twitter today was what's going on as far as black employment is concerned, or black people in the US economy. And obviously the president made the point at the State of the Union address that the gains that we've seen, particularly over the past year, and then we saw that data today, and it seemed to suggest that a lot of the gains that have been made in 2017 have been lost just in the prior month. Can you talk to us about what's going on overall in this sector of the economy?
Yeah, so unemployment for African Americans fell to a record low in December, and of course the president was touting that. And that, and then again, as you said, in January, the unemployment rate for African Americans bounced back up quite a bit. But, sort of cutting through the noise there, what that is kind of ignoring is that we've had a big drop in labor force participation, not just for African Americans, but for the entire labor force. But especially for certain groups of African Americans, this has been really pronounced. And so what these lines are showing you are labor force participation for various demographics of African Americans. The yellow and blue lines show men between the ages of 25 and 34 and 35 and 44. And then the red and green lines show women. And you can see that for the 35 to 44 age groups, we've actually seen quite a nice bounce in labor force participation over the last year or so. But for those groups of African Americans between the ages of 25 and 34, labor force participation is really still quite low relative to historical levels. So when you hear those kind of statistics like, black unemployment is at or near a record low, that's kind of ignoring this big story that we've been talking about for several years, really since the crisis. And so it's good to keep that in mind.
Yeah,
participation rate here key.
Exactly.